How to turn the ultimate disappointment or setback, and some people might even use the word failure, into success with ADHD. That's what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to do that by sharing one of, if not the most disappointing moments in my life. And it was that I failed the USMLE step 1 exam in medical school. And it is like, I would say, particularly for people who aren't familiar with the medical school process or pathway to being a doctor, it is probably the most important exam of your career. We take it in medical school, and it is used basically by residency programs, which is the training that comes after medical school, to basically say whether you're a good candidate or not, or if they're going to grant you an interview to be able to apply for the program. So for me, I was taking step 1 and finishing medical school to be able to go to residency training for 4 years of training to become a psychiatrist. And I failed that step 1 exam. And I remember where I was that day. My now husband, then boyfriend, we were in the early stages of dating, had picked me up from the airport. I'd come home from, I think, winter break, if I'm remembering correctly, when results came out. And I opened the email with the result after I'd just gotten in the car. And I was devastated. I felt, ashamed. Like, oh my gosh, if people find out, what are they going to think? Thoughts that, oh, I'm so stupid. I'm never going to get into, residency, my dreams. How am I going to do this? I felt disappointed. I felt sad. And I felt like, oh my gosh, I spent so much time studying. How am I going to possibly do this? And I'm going to have to tell all these people, and just really afraid of judgment. And of course, doing a lot of comparison to my peers. And it's already such a high pressure situation, applying to medical school and being in the top school that I was at. And, my husband, he was very sweet at the time. I think he shared also one of the most devastating things that had happened to him in his life, which I appreciated at the time. But what I didn't know at the time, or leading up to that exam, that I later found out, was, I likely have ADHD. And I remember, my whole life, and looking back and reflecting on that exam and all exams, really, I spent so much time studying, I all-nighters, and it just felt like no matter how much I read or how much time I spent on things, it was so hard to just get everything in. I had to reread things, go over things a lot. And, it was really, really hard. And my whole life was just, how I got through things was just by brute force, right? Just like grit, grinding it out and putting in the time and the effort far and beyond what, my peers were doing, or I felt like, should be what's necessary. And, I didn't think before this exam, failing this exam, I didn't think anything of it. I just thought that's how it was. And, coming from an immigrant family as well, nobody taught me how to study or what a normal routine was like. I made it up. I learned it myself, like I said, just through grit and sheer determination and pushing through. And I hit a point where, man, the amount of information was just like, they say being sprayed by a fire hose, and it hit a point where what I was doing just wasn't going to work. And not because of any failing of my own, but truly because of how my brain works, right? And so I had to learn to do things differently. And um, most importantly, I got help from a psychiatrist who is one of the reasons I'm doing what I am today through the power of that relationship. Um, and that realization and the help that I received, which was part of it, was medication, was like, wow, life-changing, truly. And, just being able to acknowledge that, it wasn't any failing per se on my part or shortcoming. I just had to learn and become aware of what was going on for me individually and the supports I needed and the ways I need to study or operate. The other thing is that, the resources that were available to me, I think, were not geared towards people who were not necessarily um, the norm, right? I think it was very difficult to access resources that I needed to help. And that's something I'm very mindful of today when I treat my patients in my clinic is helping them, one, being aware of resources that are available, and two, that they can ask for it, right? And so one of the things that really helped was number one, getting help and getting help from people who knew what they were doing, licensed professionals. And number two is becoming aware of resources and supports that were available to me. And if they were not available, is finding ways to create them or access them, finding out where they were is another thing, asking the right people to be connected. And also surrounding myself with support in terms of friends, family, and other loved ones to help lift me up. And, like my husband, tell me, equally embarrassing stories. And that leads into my third point is, dealing with shame. I think that, well, I know that when someone deals with these kinds of things their whole life, it is easy to internalize feelings of shame and even some guilt. And one of the things that's important with shame is to stop and think, why do I feel this way about myself? And looking at the facts. And the facts were and are for people with ADHD, your brain is different. And it's not a failing of yourself per se. It's a need to find things that work for you and get the right help and get plugged in with the right tools. But dealing with the shame and the other negative feelings that are internalized is so, so important. And finding community and getting the help. Um, and since that time, one being aware of what's actually going on and accessing all the things that I've mentioned, it's been, I freeing in a way, uh, not necessarily blaming myself, but working with my strengths and knowing my weaknesses and finding ways to work with those. And one of the other things that has come out of it is my passion for helping other people, with ADHD and who struggle, and really being aware of those struggles, particularly, in professional life and what it takes to be successful at work and in school and having those insights because it can be really, really, really hard. And oftentimes, you can feel like you're alone, like nothing works, like nobody understands. And there can be a lot of comparison to peers. And so I really enjoy working with my patients and other people who are going through similar things. And not only do I help based on my clinical expertise, but also through life experience, which I think is important in relating to the human that's in front of me. And so that's just a little bit about, you know, my one of the most disappointing things that have happened in my life and how it has helped me to be who I am today. And I've been able to be successful beyond anything that I, would have ever thought or beyond what I dreamed, even with that. And it all goes back to, in my opinion, support, getting help, the right help, finding the resources that are helpful to you, and finding ways to work with your strengths and your weaknesses. I went on to pass not just that step one exam on my second attempt, but all the other exams of medical school on my first try, and the huge board certification exam after that comes after I completed my psychiatry residency training. And it was such a more pleasant experience than anything that I'd had before failing that step one exam because I had gotten help, I had community, and I was aware of what was going on for me and some of the things that would help me and how to play into my strengths and my weaknesses. And also, importantly, there wasn't that same sense of shame that I'd had before, or even comparison. And so I encourage anybody watching this video that can relate to really, take note of everything I've shared and see how you can apply it to your own life. And if you like what I've said here, please do like, comment, share, reach out, do all the things. And I will be sharing more here at least 2 to 3 times a week.